Valery Fyodorovich Zaluzhny was born in the city of Novohrad-Volhynsky in the Zhytomyr province, located in northern Ukraine, on July 8, 1973. His family had a long military tradition, and his father, Fyodor Zaluzhny, was an officer in the Soviet army. After spending a few years of his childhood in Chernihiv, in the northeastern part of the country, Zaluzhny completed his studies in the Municipal School No. 9 in Novohrad-Volhynsky in 1989, and precisely during the traumatic period that began for the Soviet Union with the fall of the Berlin Wall that same year, he entered the Technical School of Machinery building in his hometown. As he learned his technical skills, a whole revolution took place around him. The communist regimes of the Warsaw Pact countries fell one by one, and from 1990 onwards, the Soviet Union itself began to disintegrate, with the Baltic countries declaring their independence of the formerly monolithic superpower. In December 1991, the red flag was unfurled for the last time from the Kremlin towers, decreeing the definitive end of the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. And this event brought with it a sudden change in Zaluzhny's life. His homeland would now be an independent nation, Ukraine. Although the new national colors now appeared in the flag, much remained unchanged in the new Ukraine. The new country had inherited the Soviet military infrastructure built up over decades, and it had an army of 800,000 men. Graduating from the technical school in 1993 at the top of his class, showing brilliant performance and discipline, Zaluzhny at the same time found himself involved in the period of severe economic recession that engulfed the region following the Soviet dismantling. Good industrial jobs were in short supply, and he decided to follow the family tradition and join the military. His high grades at the technical school facilitated his entry into the Military Academy of Odessa on the shores of the Black Sea, one of the oldest and most traditional military academies of the former Russian Empire. Maintaining his high academic performance, Zaluzhny graduated with honors in 1997, being commissioned a junior lieutenant and taking command of an infantry platoon. That was when he first came into contact with US military doctrine, whose army had maintained a small presence in the country since becoming one of his guarantors after the signing of the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, in return for Ukraine's agreement to relinquish its military arsenal to Russia. Considered a standard soldier and a model of leadership, Zaluzhny gradually rose through the ranks of the Ukrainian army and served as an instructor and company commander, alternating between academic posts and commanding operational units. Throughout his rise, he combined his knowledge obtained in technical training and his high degree of personal pragmatism with his vision of troop command, seeking to distinguish leaders and value individual talents in the distribution of tasks. In 2003, he became one of the youngest battalion commanders in the Ukrainian army, and in 2005 he joined the Ukrainian National Defense Academy in the capital Kyiv, the most prestigious military education institution in the country, responsible for preparing officers for strategic roles of command and general staff. 2 years later, in 2007, Zaluzhny graduated with the Academy's Gold Medal and was immediately made Deputy Commander and Chief of Staff of the 24th Mechanized Brigade, the oldest and most traditional unit in service of the Ukrainian Land Forces, based in Yavoriv, in the province of Lvov, once again delivering an impeccable performance as a ranking officer, recognized for personally inspecting even the smallest fractions. On 13 October 2009, he finally received his first major command, the 51st Guards Mechanized Brigade, a unit originally created during the Battle of Stalingrad in the Second World War. The first decade of the 21st century, however, had not been beneficial for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The never-ending financial crisis had drastically reduced the number of active-duty military personnel, as well as material available for employment. The entire bomber force had been retired after the disposal of the nuclear arsenal, due to its high maintenance cost. Of the nearly 1,000 tanks that Ukraine had at its disposal in the early 90s, the vast majority were scrapped, creating a huge tank graveyard near Kyiv, with only a handful of vehicles remaining operational. Of the 800,000-strong army that Ukraine had at its birth, only 130,000 soldiers remain, and of these, only 7,000 could be considered fit for combat. However, the reduction of personnel would not be the most compromising factor, especially after the election of President Viktor Yanukovych in 2010, the upper echelons of the armed forces and intelligence services were occupied by pro-Russian officials, who further collaborated to reduce the country's combat capacity. The Maidan Square revolution resulted in the escape of President Yanukovych and the opening of hostilities by rebels in eastern Ukrainian provinces. Supported militarily by Russia, rebel forces soon took control of large portions of the territory, being followed shortly by the Russian invasion of the Crimean Peninsula. The few Ukrainian military units available failed to react, or were prevented from acting by orders from their own commanders, with some units even going over to Russia. Colonel Valery Zaluzhny was made deputy commander of Sector C of the front line in the Donetsk region, where after months of inaction, Ukrainian forces were able to contain the separatists' advance only at great cost, until an armistice was signed in February 2015. Zaluzhny remained on the Donbass front lines until 2017, when he was made Chief of Staff of the Western Operational Command, and on 23 of August of that year he was finally promoted to the rank of Major General. The national emergency with the Russian annexation of Crimea and the separatists in the east promoted a rapid and profound change within the Ukrainian Armed Forces, leading to the dismissal or even imprisonment of incompetent and collaborationist officers, at the same time that this vacuum of power was filled by new officers, selected on the basis of their energy and professionalism. And that's how Valery Zaluzhny, at the age of 44, was eventually elevated to the position of Chief of Operations of the General Staff of the Armed Forces, the youngest in Ukrainian history. In this position, Zaluzhny strengthened the guidelines that promoted the expansion of freedom of action for small units on the front line, and the decentralization of decision-making processes, measures that completely contradicted the old military regulation of the Soviet academies, in which many senior Ukrainian officers had studied. Zaluzhny also promoted the development of a new class of professional sergeants, elements that bring together the maximum qualities of leadership of combat units, a class whose importance has been seriously relegated in the Russian armed forces. After nearly 2 years as head of operations, on December 9, 2019, he was made commander of the Northern Operational Command, an important military area that encompasses the entire Ukrainian border with Moscow's most traditional ally, Belarus. In this role, Zaluzhny developed a complex plan to defend the capital Kyiv against an enemy advance, as he correctly anticipated that the Russians would likely use Belarusian territory to launch their offensive. Defense lines in depth were established, as well as a vast and drastic plan to demolish the local infrastructure of bridges, viaducts, and tunnels to delay the enemy's advance. On March 28, 2020, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky modified the country's military command structure, creating the position of Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, a fully operational position, separate from the Chief of General Staff and reporting directly to the Minister of Defense. And to occupy this position, he selected General Ruslan Khomchak, who until then has served as Chief of General Staff. However, with tensions with Russia deepening in 2021, the risk of war again became worrisome, and the presidency decided that a definite change in the highest rank of the armed forces was necessary to lead Ukraine during a future conflict with Moscow. Zelensky decided to replace Khomchak, who had begun his military career in the former Soviet Union, graduating in the Moscow Military Academy in 1988, with a younger officer who had never had such an experience, and that officer would be General Valery Zaluzhny. Appointed to Supreme Command on July 27, 2021, at the age of 48, Zaluzhny became the youngest Ukrainian military man to achieve this kind of authority, also taking a seat on the Defense and National Security Council. Since then, he has given interviews on the country's main media channels, assuring the apprehensive population that his armed forces were ready to face the enemy in a future conflict. Zaluzhny also commanded large-scale exercises held at Rivne, in which the Ukrainian army made heavy use for the first time of its most modern weapons, the Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drone and the US anti-tank missile Javelin, as well as various electronic warfare systems. We have to permanently move away from that map-based war, from that 1943-style battles. In these exercises, we practice command process from a tactical operations center, equipped with the most modern intelligence and surveillance equipment. We encourage regular, special, and auxiliary forces to work together. Despite being a popular figure and enjoying the respect and trust of the soldiers, Valery Zaluzhny is not publicly exposed, and especially after the start of the Russian invasion on February 22nd, he has kept himself out of the spotlight and under constant escort, as his name has appeared on a potential elimination list by Russian special forces. On March 4th, President Zelensky promoted him to 4-star general, the highest ranking in the country, in a gesture that reflected the nation's recognition of his leadership of the resistance to the initial Russian offensive, preventing the consolidation of a quick victory for Moscow in Ukraine. Married and father of 2 daughters, the eldest whom is also serving in the military, General Valery Zaluzhny has been kept under heavy security, scarcely appearing on camera and speaking out only occasionally through his social media accounts, while maintaining the complex task of managing the most intense European battlefront in nearly 80 years.